Wish I could figure out that someone doing that. Just mute myself. Okay. What is all these scuffed openings? I really can't hear myself. Be nice when I get new equipment in tomorrow. Maybe. Anyway. Good evening, Cubs. I felt like we should go back to the drawing board and do some more of the original fairy tales. I got my Brothers Grimm book out. Yeah. This one. Go ahead and get my shares out quick. Make sure people know that I'm on. That a lot of you pups ever come in. But at least you watch the VODs occasionally, so it's always nice. I'm horrible promoting myself, so try to do what I can. Dun, dun, dun. No, I can't just get a mass message out on Discord. That I'm just doing that wrong too. Getting a message out on Twitter's easy enough because it just links up. Beginning to send out over all the other chat setups. That's where it starts to become more of a hassle. Especially when it's all sit under my different handles and everything else. Okay. That covers the shares. So, like I said, we're going back to the good old book. Catch up on some of the original fairy tales. I don't know if anyone can hear me right or not. Since I can't really watch myself, I had to mute myself on the computer so I wouldn't hear the echo. Echo was pain, but okay, I got my tablet up, see if I'm recording well. Okay. Oh, I can hear on that one. Of course, the whispering sound automatically drawing one cat over. What do you want, Arya? What do you want, sweet little baby kitten? Yeah, you're a fluffy girl. Okay. So anyway, let me check to see if I can actually hear my sound alerts if anyone plays. Okay. I did not hear that. Oh, because sound alerts are on. Try that again. I gotta fix that. Okay. Story time. Coffee. It's beautiful story time. Coffee way up there. There's coffee. Coffee. And down here. Thank you. Sound alerts. For you. Sound alerts. Okay. Try it one more time. I should really do all this stuff before it starts. That is behind. Let's get up there. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sure they're on top of everything else. Right. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read a couple of stories tonight, just because, well, they are fairy tales and they tend to be fairly short. I'm not so much going to do this like the ASMR roleplay, since, well, tucking in the kids and that kind of thing, I usually try to save for the weekends when it would be, make a little bit more sense that I'd be doing it. So, the first story in this complete first edition of Folks and Fairy Tales from the Brothers Grimm is oddly enough the Frog King, which is also known as Frog Prince, or also known as Iron Henry. I am drinking, but just Kahlua. So, getting my coffee and alcohol in at the same time. And, ouch. Main reason I tagged this is ASMR tonight, because it kind of makes sense from that standpoint. There's another cute young pup the other night was reading The Dog's Purpose, and she had it listed as ASMR because, well, she was reading by a fireplace, and that kind of made sense. So that was Sanika. She did the ASMR yesterday that I was listening in on, and quite frankly I enjoyed. So I wanted to put the shout out for her. As I said, cute blue pup. So again, I apologize for any weird sounding, as I am reading from a book. The book that I've pictured. I may stammer, I may stutter, just because I'm really bad at reading. But you're not here to criticize my reading, you're here to listen to stories, so let me go ahead and read a story. 3 or 4. So go ahead and get cozy, get a nice warm drink, and wrap up in a blanket if you're cold. I know it's kind of cold here, but it's cold all over the place except southern hemisphere right now. Anyway, the Frog King, or Iron Henry. Once upon a time, there was a princess who went out to the forest and sat down on the edge of a cool well. She had a golden ball that was her favorite plaything. She threw it up high and caught it in the air and was delighted by all this. One time the ball flew very high up. As she stretched out her hand and bent her fingers to catch it again, the ball hit the ground near her and rolled until it fell right into the water. The princess was horrified, and when she went to look for the ball, she found the well was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. So she began to weep miserably and to lament, "Oh, if only I had my ball again! I'd give anything, my clothes, my jewels, my pearls, and anything else in the world, to get my ball back." As she sat there grieving, Frog stuck its head out of the water and said, "Why are you weeping so miserably?" "Well, I don't want your... Oh," she said, "you nasty frog, you can't help me. My golden ball has fallen into the water." "Well, I don't want your pearls, your jewels, or your clothes," the frog responded. But will you accept me as your companion and let me sit next to you? Let me eat from the little golden plate and sleep in your little bed, and promise to love and cherish me. I'll fetch your ball for you." The princess thought, "What nonsense! The simple-minded frog is blabbering. He's got to remain in his water, but perhaps he can get me my ball. So I'll say yes to him." And she said, "Yes, fair enough, but first fetch me the golden ball. I promise you everything." The frog dipped his head beneath the water and dived down. It didn't take long before he came back to the surface with the ball in his mouth. He threw it on the ground, and when the princess caught sight of the ball again, she quickly ran over and picked it up, and was so delighted to have the ball in her hands again that she thought of nothing else but to rush back home with it. The frog called after her, "Wait, princess, take me with you the way you promised." But she didn't pay attention to him. The next day the princess sat at the table and heard something coming up the marble steps. Splish splash, splish splash. Soon thereafter it knocked on the door and cried out, "Princess, youngest daughter, open up." She ran to the door and opened it. There was the frog whom she had forgotten. Horrified, she quickly slammed the door shut and sat down back at the table. But the king saw that her heart was thumping and said, "Why are you afraid?" "There's the nasty frog outside," she replied. "He retrieved my golden ball from the water, and I promised him that he could be my companion, but I never believed that he could get it out of the water. Now he's standing outside in front of the door and wants to come inside." After she said this, there was a knock at the door, and the frog cried out, "Princess, youngest daughter, open up. Don't you remember what you said down by the well's cool water? Princess, youngest daughter, open up." The king said, "You must keep your promise, no matter what you said. Go and open the door for the frog." She obeyed, and the frog hopped inside and followed at her heels until they came to her chair, and when she sat down again, he cried out, "Lift me up to the chair beside you." Princess didn't want to do this, but the king ordered her to do it. When the frog was up at the table, he said, "Now push your little golden plate nearer to me so that we can eat together." The princess had to do this as well, and after he had eaten till he was full, he said, "Now I'm tired and want to sleep. Bring me upstairs to your little room. Get your little bed ready so that we can lie down in it." The princess became terrified when she heard this, for she was afraid of the cold frog. She didn't dare touch him. Now he was to lie next to her in bed. She began to weep and didn't want to comply with his wishes at all. But the king became angry and ordered her to do what she had promised, or she'd be held in disgrace. Nothing helped. She had to do what her father wanted, but she was bitterly angry in her heart. So she picked up the frog with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs into her room, lay down in her bed, and instead of setting him down next to her, She threw him, crash, against the wall. "Now you'll leave me in peace, you nasty frog." But the frog didn't fall down dead. Instead, he fell down on the bed. He became a handsome young prince. Well, now, indeed, he did become her dear companion, and she cherished him as she had promised, and in their delight they fell asleep together. The next morning a splendid coach arrived, drawn by 8 horses with feathers and glistening gold harnesses. The prince's faithful Henry accompanied them. He had been so distressed when he had learned that his master had been turned into a frog that he had ordered 3 iron bands to be wrapped around his heart to keep him from bursting from grief. When the prince got into the coach with the princess, his faithful servant took his place at the back so they could return to the prince's realm. And after they travelled some distance, the prince heard a loud cracking noise behind him. He turned round and cried out, "Henry, the coach is breaking!" "No, my lord, it's really nothing, but the band around my heart, which nearly came apart when you turned into a frog, and your fortune fell, and you were made to live in that dreadful well." 2 more times the prince heard the cracking noise, and thought the coach was breaking. But the noise was only the sound of the band springing from the faithful Henry's heart, because his master had been released from the spell and was happy. So that entire last part about the faithful servant was completely unnecessary, I suppose. But I guess a nice touch that you actually have a faithful companion that, be crushed if anything happened to you. Alright. A second story. The Companionship of the Cat and Mouse. That's already sounding more like a fable. A cat and a mouse wanted to live together, so that they set up a common household. They also prepared for winter and bought a little jar of fat, but since they didn't know of a better and safer place to put it, they stuck it in the altar in the church, where it was supposed to stay until they needed it. Well, that's already fairly confusing. Now, it was not long before the cat felt a craving for the fat and went to the mouse and said, "Listen, little mouse, my cousin has asked me to be a godfather for her child. She gave birth to a baby boy, white with brown spots. I'm to hold him at the christening. Would you mind letting me go out today and taking care of the house by yourself?" "No, no," answered the mouse. "Go there, and when you get something good to eat, think of me. I sure would like a little drop of that sweet and red christening wine." But the cat went straight to the church and licked up the skin of the top of the fat. Then he strolled around the city and didn't return home until evening. "You must have enjoyed yourself very much," the mouse said. "What name did they give the child?" "Skin-off," the cat answered. "Skin-off? That's a strange name. I've never heard of it before." Soon thereafter the cat felt another craving and went to the mouse and said, "I've been asked to be godfather once more. The child has a white ring around his body. I can't refuse. You must do me a favor and look after the house." The mouse consented, and the cat went and ate up half of the jar of fat. When he returned home, the mouse asked, What name was this godchild given?" "Half gone." "Half gone, you don't say. I never heard of such a name. I'm sure it's not on the list of proper baptismal names." Now the cat couldn't stop thinking about the jar of fat. "I've been asked to godfather again for the 3rd time. This child's black and has white paws. Aside from that, there's not a white hair on his body. That only happens once every few years. You'll let me go, won't you?" "Skin-off, half gone," the mouse said. "Those are really curious names. I'm beginning to wonder about them. Even so, go ahead." The mouse cleaned the house and put it in order. Meanwhile, the cat ate up the rest of the fat in the jar and came home stout and stuffed late at night. What's the name of the third child? All gone. All gone? Hey now, that's the most suspicious of all the names, said the mouse. All gone? What's it supposed to mean? I've never seen it in print. Upon saying that, the mouse shook her head and went to sleep. Nobody called upon the cat to become a godfather for the fourth time. However, soon winter came, and there was nothing more to be found outside. So the mouse said to the cat, Come, let's go get our supply of fat, supply that we stuck beneath the altar of the church. But when they arrived there, the jar was completely empty. Oh, said the mouse, now I know what's happened. It's clear as day. You ate it all up when you went to serve as godfather. First the skin, then half, then... Shut up, yelled the cat. One more word and I'll eat you up. All gone was already on the tip of the poor mouse's tongue. No sooner did she say it than the cat jumped on her and swallowed her in one gulp. Cats, man. Really. Okay. Third one. Interesting that this isn't a book of fairy tales. You'll really find it amusing when I tell you what the title of the story is. The Virgin Mary's Child. A poor woodcutter and his wife lived at the edge of a large forest with their only child, a 3-year-old little girl. They were so poor that they couldn't afford daily meals anymore, and didn't know how they would provide food for their daughter. One morning, the woodcutter, who was distressed by all this, went into the forest to work. He began chopping wood. A tall, beautiful woman suddenly appeared before him. She was wearing a crown of shining stars on her head and said to him, I am the Virgin Mary, mother of the Christ child. Since you are poor and needy, bring me your child. I'll take her with me to be her mother and look after her. The woodcutter obeyed her, and fetched his child, and gave her to the Virgin Mary, who took her up to heaven. Once there, everything went well for the girl. She only ate cake and drank sweet milk. Her clothes were made of gold, and little angels played with her. One day, about the time the girl had turned 14, the Virgin Mary had to go on a long journey. Before she went away, she summoned the girl and said, Dear child, I am trusting you with the keys to the 13 doors of the kingdom of heaven. You may open 12 of the doors and look at all the marvelous things inside, but I forbid you to open the 13th door that this little key unlocks. The maiden promised to obey her commands, and after the Virgin Mary had departed, she opened a new room every day and looked into the rooms of the heavenly realm. In each one of them she saw an apostle dazzling light. Never in her life had she seen such splendor and glory. When she finished opening the 12 doors, the forbidden door was the only one left. For a long time she resisted her curiosity, but finally she was overcome by it, and opened the 13th door as well. And when the door sprang open, she saw the Holy Trinity sitting by a fire in splendor. When she touched the flames a little bit with her fingers, the finger became golden. She quickly slammed the door shut and ran away, her heart pounding and wouldn't stop. A few days later, the Virgin Mary returned from her journey and asked the maiden to return the keys to heaven for her. The girl handed her the bunch of keys. The Virgin looked into her eyes and said, Didn't you also open the 13th door? No, she answered. Then the Virgin Mary put her hand on the maiden's heart and could feel it pounding and pounding. She knew the girl had disobeyed her command and had opened the door. Once again she asked, Are you sure you didn't open the door? I'm sure, the maiden denied, doing it for a second time. When the Virgin glanced at the finger that had become golden from touching the heavenly fire, she knew the maiden was guilty and said, "You've disobeyed me and lied. You're no longer worthy to stay in heaven." All at once the girl sank into a deep sleep, and when she awoke, she was lying on the earth beneath a tall tree, surrounded by thick bushes so that she was completely encircled. Her mouth was also locked so that she couldn't utter a word. Since the tree was hollow, she could sit inside during the rain and storms, and it was also where she slept. Roots and wild berries were her only food, and she went out looking for them as far as she could walk. In the autumn she gathered roots and leaves and carried them into the hollow tree. When the snow and ice came, she sat inside the tree. Before long her clothes became tattered, and one piece after another fell off her body, so she sat there completely covered by leaves. As soon as the sun began to rise again, she went out and sat in front of the tree, her long hair covered on all sides like a cloak. One day during springtime she was sitting in front of the tree when someone forced his way through the bushes. It was the king, who had been hunting in the forest and had lost his way. He was amazed to find such a beautiful maiden sitting alone in a desolate spot, so he asked her whether she would like to come with him to his castle. However, she couldn't answer. Instead, she merely nodded a little with her head. The king lifted her up onto his horse and brought her to the castle. Soon he became so fond of her that he made her his wife. After a year had passed, the queen gave birth to a beautiful son. During the night, however, the Virgin Mary appeared before her and said, "If you'll tell me the truth and say that you unlocked the forbidden door, I'll give you back the power of speech, without which you really can't enjoy life. If you are stubborn and won't confess, I shall take your baby away with me." Dang. But the queen remained stubborn and denied that she had opened the forbidden door. So the Virgin Mary took the little child and disappeared with him. The next morning, when the baby was no longer there, a rumor began circulating among the people that the queen was an ogress and had eaten her own child. Another year passed, and the queen gave birth to another. Once more the Virgin Mary appeared before her and asked her to tell the truth, otherwise she would also lose a second child. But the queen persisted in denying that she had opened the forbidden door, so the Virgin Mary took the child away with her. The next morning, when the baby was also missing, the king's counselors said openly that the queen was an ogress. They demanded that she be executed for her godless deeds. However, the king ordered them to keep quiet and refused to believe them because he loved his wife so much. In the third year, the queen gave birth to a princess, and the Virgin Mary appeared before her once more and took her to heaven, where she showed her how the two oldest children were playing with the globe of the earth. Thereupon the Virgin Mary asked the queen once more to confess her mistake and stop lying. However, the queen didn't budge and continued to stand by her story. So the Virgin Mary left her and took away her third child. Now the king could no longer restrain his counselors, who continued to claim that the queen was an ogress. They were certain, and since she couldn't speak, she couldn't defend herself. Consequently, she was condemned to die at the stake. Because that's how they do. As she stood tied to a stake and the fire began to burn all around her, her heart was moved, and she thought to herself, "Oh, before I die, I'd like to confess to the Virgin Mary that I opened the forbidden door in heaven. I've been so wicked by denying all this time." And just as she was thinking this to herself, heaven opened up right then and there, and Virgin Mary descended with two little sons at either side and a daughter in her arms. The fire was extinguished by itself, and the Virgin Mary stepped forward to the queen and said, "Since you want to speak the truth, your guilt is forgiven." Then she handed the queen her children, opened her mouth so that she could speak from then on, and bestowed upon her happiness for the rest of her life. You go to heaven and you lie about it, you get your kids taken. I never said anything about the her golden finger, but oh well. Good bowling and card playing. You want to guess what this one's about? Once upon a time, there was an old king who had the most beautiful daughter in the world. Don't they all? One day he announced, "Whoever can keep watch in my old castle for 3 nights can have the princess for his bride." Now there was a young man from a poor family who thought to himself, "Why not risk my life? I've got nothing to lose and a lot to win. What's there to think about?" So he appeared before the king and offered to keep watch in the castle for 3 nights. "You may request 3 things to take with you into the castle, but they have to be lifeless objects," the king said. "Well, I'd like to take a carpenter's bench with a knife, lathe, and a fire." All of those things were carried into the castle for him. When it turned dark, he himself went inside. At first, everything was quiet. He built a fire, placed the carpenter's bench with a knife next to it, and sat down at the lathe. Towards midnight, however, a rumbling could be heard, first softly, then more loudly. Biff, baff, hee hee, hollo! Hollo? Howdy, howdy, ho! It became more dreadful, and then it became somewhat quiet. Finally, a leg came down the chimney and stood right before him. "Hey there," the young man cried out. "How about some more? One is too little." The noise began once again. Another leg fell down the chimney, then another and another, until there were 9. "That's enough now. I've got enough for bowling. There ain't no balls. Out with them." There was a tremendous uproar, and 2 skulls fell down the chimney. He put them on the lathe and turned them until they were smooth. "Now they'll roll much better." Then he did the same with the legs and turned them like bowling pins. "Hey, now I can have some fun." Suddenly 2 large black cats appeared and strode around the fire. "Meow, meow," they screeched. "We're freezing, we're freezing." Because cats do that. "You fools, what are you screaming about? Sit down by the fire and warm yourselves." After the cats had warmed themselves, they said, because, cats talk, "Good fellow, we want to play a round of cards." Because, cats do that. Black cats are card players. They cheat like the dickens. "All right," he replied, "but show me your paws. You've got such long claws that I've got to give them a good clipping before we begin." Smart man. Upon saying this, he grabbed them by the scruffs of their necks and lifted them onto the carpenter's bench, where he fastened them down to the vise and beat them to death. Hello? Afterward, he carried them outside and threw them into a pond that lay across the castle. Just as he returned to the castle and wanted to settle down and warm himself by the fire, many black dogs and cats came out of every nook and cranny, more and more so that he couldn't hide himself. They screamed, stamped on the fire, and kicked out so that the fire went out. So he grabbed the carving knife and yelled, "Get out of here, you Riff-Raff!" He began swinging the knife. Most of the cats and dogs ran away. The others were killed, and he carried them out and threw them into the pond. Then when he got back to the fire and blew the sparks so that the fire began itself, he could warm himself. After he had warmed himself, he was tired and lay down on a large bed that stood in the corner. Just as he wanted to fall asleep, the bed began to stir and raced around the entire castle. "That's just fine with me. Just keep it up." So the bed drove around the castle as though it were being pulled by 6 horses over the strain of the landings. Bing, bang! It turned upside down from top to bottom, and he was beneath it. So he flung the blankets and pillows into the air and jumped off. "Anyone who wants a ride can have one." Then he lay down next to the fire until dawn. In the morning the king arrived, and he saw that the man was lying asleep, and thought he was dead, and said, "What a shame." But when the young man heard these words, he woke, and as soon as he saw the king, he stood up. Then the king asked him how things had gone that night. "Quite well. One night's gone by smoothly. The other two will go by just as well." Indeed, the other nights were just like the first, but he already knew what to do. And on the fourth day, he was rewarded with the king's beautiful daughter. I'm going to read that entire thing and make him sound southern. This last one go. "Quite well. Night's gone by smoothly, and the other two will be just as well." Uh, yeah, this next story I think I've read to you before. The Wolf and the Seven Kids. A goat had 7 young kids, whom she loved very much and carefully protected from the wolf. One day, when she had to go and fetch some food, she called them all together and said, "Dear children, I must go out to find some food. So be on your guard against the wolf and don't let him inside. Pay close attention because he often disguises himself, but you can recognize him right away by his gruff voice and black paws." I am reading Grimm's fairy tales, like the original versions. So this one's The Wolf and the Seven Kids. So. Protect yourselves. If he gets into the house, he'll eat you all up. Upon saying this, the goat went on her way, but it was not long before the wolf arrived at the door and called out, "Open up, dear children. I'm your mother and have brought you some beautiful things." I guess I'll do its gruff voice. Try again. "Open up, dear children. I'm your mother and I've brought you some beautiful things." But the 7 kids said, "You're not our mother. She has this lovely soft voice, and yours is gruff. You're the wolf, and you're not going to open the door for you." The wolf went away to a shopkeeper and bought a big piece of chalk, which he ate, to make his voice soft. Then he returned to the house door of the 7 kids and spoke with a soft voice. "Dear children, let me in. I'm your mother, and I've brought something for each of you." But the wolf put his paw on the windowsill, and when the children saw it, they said, "You're not our mother. She doesn't have black paws like yours. You're the wolf. We're not gonna open the door for you." uh, So the wolf ran to a baker and said, "Baker, put some dough on my paws for me." Because that's what wolves do. So after that was done, the wolf went to the miller and said, "Sprinkle some white flour on my paws." The miller said, "No. If you don't do it, I'll eat you up." So the miller had to do it. Now the wolf went once again to the door of the 7 kids and said, "Dear children, let me in. I'm your mother, and I've brought something for each of you." The 7 kids wanted to see the paws first, and when they saw that they were snow white, they heard the wolf speak so softly they thought he was their mother, and opened the door. Once Wolf entered, however, they recognized him and quickly hid themselves as best they could. The first kid slid under the table, the second hid in the bed, the third in the oven, the fourth in the kitchen, the fifth in the cupboard, the sixth under the large wash basin, the seventh in the clock case. However, the wolf found them all and swallowed them, except for the youngest in the clock case, who remained alive. When the wolf had satisfied his cravings, he went off. Shortly thereafter, the goat mother came home, and oh, what a terrible sight! The wolf had been there and devoured her dear children. She thought they were all dead, but the youngest jumped out of the clock case and told her how everything had happened. In the meantime, the wolf, who was stuffed, had gone to the green meadow, where he had lain himself down in the sun and fallen into a deep sleep. The old goat thought she might be able to save all her children. Therefore, she said to the youngest child, "Grab the scissors, needle, and thread, and follow me." After she left the house, she found the wolf lying on the ground in the meadow and snoring. "That's the nasty wolf," she said, and inspected him from all sides. "There he is after eating my 6 children for supper. Give me the scissors. Oh, if only they're still alive inside him." Chew your food, cubs. That way you don't have to worry about this kind of thing. Then she cut his belly open, and the 6 kids that had been swallowed whole by the gluttonous wolf jumped out and were unscathed. Seriously, chew your food. Immediately she ordered them to gather large and heavy stones, and bring them to her. Then she filled his stomach with them, and the kids sewed him up and hid behind a hedge. When the wolf had finished sleeping, damn, he's a deep sleeper, he felt that his stomach was very heavy and said, "Oh, it's rumbling and tumbling in my belly. It's rumbling and tumbling in my belly, and I've only eaten 6 kids." He thought that he had better have a drink of fresh water and help himself. Well, he looked for a well, but when he leaned over, he couldn't stand up straight because the stones fell into the water. When the 7 kids saw this, they came running and danced joyfully around the well. These stories are not meant for wolves, honestly. Chew your food. Don't leave any survivors. No, wait, that's a bad moral. Chew your food. That's worse than the Red Riding Hood story. Same moral. Chew your food. Don't, wolf it down. Okay. Next story, The Nightingale and the Blindworm. Once upon a time there lived a nightingale and a blindworm, each with one eye. For a long time they lived together peacefully and harmoniously in a house. However, one day the nightingale was invited to a wedding, and she said to the blindworm, "I've been invited to a wedding and don't particularly want to go with one eye. Would you be so kind as to lend me yours? I'll bring it back to you tomorrow." The hell? And Tales from the Black Forest are just weird. The blindworm gave her the eye out of the kindness of her heart, but when the nightingale came home the following day, she liked having 2 eyes in her head, and being able to see on both sides, so she refused to return the borrowed eye to the blindworm. Then the blindworm swore that she would avenge herself on the nightingale's children, and the children of her children. "Well," replied the nightingale, "see if you can find me." Ooh, nasty bird. "I'll build my nest in the linden so high, so high, so high, you'll never be able to find it, no matter how hard you try." Ever since that time, all the nightingales have had 2 eyes, and all the blindworms none. But whenever a nightingale builds her nest, a blindworm flies beneath it in the bushes and constantly tries to crawl up the tree, pierce the eggs of her enemy, and drink them all up. That's just a little morbid. Don't loan things to roommates, I guess. I don't know if that's a good moral or not. That's just kind of creepy, actually. Okay. The Stolen Pennies. One day a father was sitting at the table with his wife and children, and a good friend who was visiting him. They were having a noonday meal. As they were sitting there, the clock struck 12, and the visitor saw the door open. A little pale child dressed as Snow White clothes entered. He didn't look around or say anything, but silently went into the next room. Shortly thereafter, he returned and went away just as quietly as it had entered. On the second and third day, the child came again. Finally, the visitor asked the father who the beautiful child was that entered the room every day at noon. The father answered that he knew nothing about him, hadn't seen anything. The next day, as the clock struck noon, the child entered again, and the visitor pointed out the child out to the father, and he didn't see the boy. Neither did the mother nor the other children. The visitor stood up and went to the door and opened a little, looked inside. There he saw a pale child sitting on the floor, digging and rummaging in the cracks in the boards. However, as soon as the child noticed the visitor, he disappeared. Now the visitor told the family what he had seen, gave an exact description of the boy. The mother was able to recognize the child and said, "Alas, it's my own dear child who died 4 weeks ago." When they ripped up the boards in the floor and found 2 pennies that the boy had received from his mother at one time to give to a poor man. But the child had thought, "You can buy yourself a biscuit for that." Therefore, he had kept the pennies and hidden them in the cracks of the floor. This is why he hadn't been able to rest in his grave. He'd come back every day at noon to look for those pennies. So the parents gave the money to a poor man, and after that, the little child was never seen again. Okay. Well, there's a moral somewhere in that. Keep greedy and you don't pass on, I guess. Wonder what these stories would sound like in the original German. Oh well. I don't read German anyway. Number 8. The Hand with the Knife. That's just going to start sounding sinister right away. There was once a little girl who had 3 brothers, and the boys meant the world to her mother. Yet the little girl was always neglected, treated badly, and forced to go out early in the morning to dig up peat from the dry ground from the hearth, which they would use to make fires for cooking. To top it all off, she was given a blunt old shovel to perform this nasty work. But the little girl had an admirer who was an elf and lived in the hill near her mother's house. Whenever she went by the hill, he would stretch out his hand of the rocky slope and offer her a knife that had miraculous powers and cut through anything. She used this knife to cut through the peat and would finish her work quickly. Then she would return home happily with the necessary load. When she walked by the rocky slope, she would knock twice, and the hand would reach out and take back the knife. When the mother noticed how swiftly and easily she came back with the peat, she told the girl's brothers that there must be someone helping her. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to complete the work so fast. So the brothers crept after her and watched her receive the magic knife. They overtook her and forced her to give it to them. Then they returned to the rocky slope, knocked the way that she had always done. When the good elf stretched out his hand, they cut it off with his very own knife. The bloody arm drew back, and since the elf believed that his beloved had betrayed him, he was never seen after that. What the hell? Morbid fairy tales. They're kind of, grim. Okay. The 12 Brothers. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 12 children, all boys. Moreover, he didn't want to have a daughter, and said to his wife, "If you give birth to our 13th child, and it's a girl, I shall have 12 boys. I shall have the 12 boys killed. However, if it's a boy, they'll remain alive and stay together." Dude. The queen thought of talking him out of this, but the king refused to hear anything more about the topic. If everything turns out like I said, they must die. I'd rather chop off their heads myself than to let a girl be amongst them. The queen was sad about this because she loved her sons with all her heart and didn't know how she could save them. Finally, she went to the youngest, who was her favorite, and revealed what the king had decided. "Dearest child," she said, "go into the forest with your 11 brothers and stay there and don't come home. One of you should keep watch on the tree and look over here towards the tower. If I give birth to a little son, I'll raise a white flag on top of the tower. However, if it's a little daughter, I'll raise a red flag. If you see that it's red, then save yourselves. Flee into the wide world, and may our dear Lord protect you. I'll get up every day and night and pray that you won't freeze in the winter, and be able to warm yourselves by a fire, and that when it's hot in the summer, you can rest in the cool forest and sleep." After she gave her blessing to her sons, they went out to the forest, where they frequently looked towards the tower. One of them had to sit on top of the high tree, and constantly keep watch. Soon a flag was hoisted, but it wasn't a white one, but a blood-red flag that foreshadowed their doom. As soon as the brothers caught sight of it, they all became angry and cried out, "Why should we lose our lives because of a girl?" Then they all swore to remain in the middle of the forest and to keep on their guard, and if a maiden were to appear, they would kill her without mercy. Soon after this, they searched for a cave where the forest was the darkest, and that's where they began to live. Every morning, 11 of the brothers went off to hunt, and one of them had to remain home, cook, and keep house. Whenever they encountered a maiden, she was treated without mercy and lost her life. This is how they lived for many years. In the meantime, their little sister grew up and was the only child left at home. One day there was a large amount of washing to do, and among the clothes were the 12 shirts for boys. "Whose shirts are these?" the princess asked the washerwoman. "They're much too small for my father." It was then that the washerwoman told her that she once had 12 brothers, but they mysteriously gone away. Nobody knew where that because the king had wanted them all killed, and the 12 shirts belonged to the 12 brothers. The little sister was astonished that she had never heard of her 12 brothers, and during the afternoon, the clothes were drying. She was sitting in the meadow and recalled the words of the washerwoman. After giving considerable thought to what she had heard, she stood up, took the 12 shirts, and went into the forest where her brothers were living. The little sister made her way straight to the cave that served as her brother's dwelling. 11 of them were out hunting. The only one of them who had to cook was home. Yeah. When he caught sight of the maiden, he composed himself and drew his sword. "Kneel down. Your red blood will flow this very second." But the maiden pleaded, "Dear sir, let me live. I'll stay with you and serve you honestly. I'll cook and keep house." She spoke these words to the youngest brother, who took pity on her because of her beauty and spared her life. Later, when his 11 brothers returned home and were astonished to find a maiden alive in their cave, he said to them, "Dear brothers, this girl came to our cave, and when I wanted to cut her to pieces, she pleaded for her life so much that I said she could serve us faithfully and keep house, and I spared her." The others thought that this would be a great benefit to them, because now all 12 of them could go hunting, and they were satisfied with this arrangement. Then the maiden showed them the 12 shirts and told them that she was their sister. Indeed, they were all very happy about this, and were glad that they hadn't killed her. Now the little sister took over the household chores, and when the brothers went out hunting, she gathered wood and herbs, and kept the fire going, made up all the beds nice and white and clean, and did everything with zeal and without getting tired. A likely story. One day, when she finished with all the work, she took a walk in the woods, came to a place where there were 12 large, beautiful white lilies. Since they pleased her so much, she plucked all 12 of them, and no sooner did she do this than an old woman stood before her. "Oh, my daughter, why didn't you let the 12 budding flowers just stand where they are? They're your 12 brothers. Now they've been changed into ravens and are lost forever." Hell? The little sister began to weep and said, "Isn't there any way I can save them?" "No, there isn't any way in the world except one that's so difficult you won't be able to rescue them. You must spend the next 12 years without speaking." Oh, I've read this one before. "If you say a single word, even if there's only 1 hour left, everything will be in vain. Your brothers will die at that very moment." Well, the little sister responded by climbing a tall tree in the forest, where she took up place. She wanted to sit there for 12 years without saying a word to free her brothers. But it so happened that a king was out riding and hunting in the forest, and he rode by the tree. His dog stood up and barked. So the king stopped, looked up, and was very amazed by the princess's beauty. He called to her and asked her whether she wanted to become his wife. However, she remained silent and only nodded a bit with her head. So the king himself dismounted and helped her down from the tree, lifted her up before him onto the horse. Then he brought her home to his castle. Meanwhile, the princess did not utter a word, and the king thought that she was mute. They would have lived happily with one another if it hadn't been for the king's mother, who began to slander the young queen in front of her son, because that's what they do, apparently. "She's a common beggar that you've dug up from nowhere, and she's doing the most disgraceful things behind your back." Right. Since the young queen couldn't defend herself, the king was led astray and finally believed what his mother said. So he sentenced his wife to death, and an enormous fire was built in the courtyard, where she was to be burned to death. Soon the queen was standing in the flames that grazed the fringes of her dress. 1 minute was left before the 12 years of her silence was completed. There was a noise in the air. 12 ravens swooped down into the courtyard. As soon as they touched the ground, they became 12 handsome princes, who instantly put out the fire's flames and led their sister to safety. Then she spoke once again, and told her king how everything had happened. Now she had to save her 12 brothers. Indeed, they were all pleased that everything turned out so well. Now they had to decide what they should do with the evil mother-in-law. Well, they struck her into a barrel full of boiling oil and poisonous snakes, and she died a ghastly death. Oh, what are we going to do with the evil mother-in-law? I have an idea. Let's stick her in a barrel full of boiling oil and poisonous snakes. If the oil was boiling, the snakes would have been dead, but admittedly, it would have been a ghastly death. So, oh, dare I read a 10th story? Why the hell not? I've only got an hour. Number 10, Riff-Raff. Street. I know.
The rooster said to the hen, "The nuts are ripe. Let's go uphill and eat our fill of nuts before the squirrel hauls them off." "Yes," responded the hen, "let's go and have a good time together." Good time munching nuts. So they went up the hill, and since it was a bright day, they stayed until evening. Now, I don't remember whether it was because they had stuffed themselves too much, or whether they had become too high and mighty, but they didn't want to return home on foot. So the rooster had to build a small carriage made out of nutshells. When it was finished, the hen got in, and the rooster said, "Now you can just harness yourselves in." "No," said the rooster, "you have some nerve. I'd rather go home by foot than let myself be harnessed to this carriage. Now that wasn't part of our bargain. I'll gladly be a coachman and sit in the box, but I refuse to pull the carriage." When they were quarreling, a duck came by, quacking, and pouted, "You thieves! Who said you could come up here on my nut hill? Just you wait. You'll pay for this." A duck's nut hill. She charged at the rooster with a wide-open beak, but the rooster was on his toes and threw himself at the duck's body, nice and hard. Then he dug his spurs into her so violently that the duck begged for mercy and willingly let herself be harnessed to the carriage as punishment. Now the rooster sat down on the box as coachman, and off they went in a gallop. "Duck, run as fast as you can," cried the rooster. After they had gone some distance, they encountered two travelers on foot, a needle and a pen, who called and asked them to stop. They said it would soon be very dark, and they wouldn't be able to go one step further. Besides, the road was so dirty, and they asked if they could have a ride. They had been to the tailor's tavern outside the town gate, and had had one beer too many, which had made them late as well. Since they were thin and didn't take up much room, the rooster let them both in, but they had to promise not to step on his or the hen's feet. Later that evening they came to an inn, and since they didn't want to travel any further, and since the duck was not walking well but swayed from side to side, they decided to stop there. At first the innkeeper raised a lot of objections and said his inn was already full. Moreover, he thought they were not a very distinguished-looking group. However, they used some sweet talk and offered him an egg that the hen had laid along the way, and told him they could also keep the duck, who laid an egg a day. So finally he relented, and they said they could spend the night. Now they ordered some good hot food and had a merry time of it. Early the next morning, as the sun was rising and everyone was asleep, the rooster woke the hen, fetched the egg, packed it open, and together they devoured it. After throwing the shells into the hearth, they went to the needle, who was still asleep, grabbed him by the head, and stuck him into the innkeeper's easy chair. Then they stuck the pen into the keeper's towel. Finally, without much ado, they flew away from the heath. The duck, who liked to sleep in the open air, and had spent the night in the yard, heard the flapping of their wings. So she roused herself, found a brook, and swam away. That went much faster than being harnessed to a carriage. A few hours later, the innkeeper got out of bed, washed himself, and took a towel to dry himself. However, the pin scratched his face, leaving a red mark from ear to ear. Then he went to the kitchen and wanted to light his pipe, but as he leaned over the hearth, the eggshells popped into his eyes. "Everything's attacking my head this morning," he said, and went to sit down in the easy chair to settle his bad mood. But he jumped up immediately and screamed, "Ow!" The needle had stuck him worse than the pin, and not in the head. Now he was completely angry and suspected the guests who had arrived so late the night before. When he went looking for them, they were gone. Then he swore he would never again let Riff-Raff stay in his inn, especially when they eat so much, pay nothing, and play mean tricks on top of it all. Seemed like legitimate reasons. just I don't even want to know where they came up with that one. Rooster and a hen going up a nut hill to get nuts before the squirrels ran off with them. Don't want to walk home. They build a carriage. A duck gets pissed off that they ate his nuts, her nuts, because it was a female duck. Cockfight ensues. Duck gets put in a harness to pull the carriage. They make it to the road, pick up a needle and a pen from a drunken tailor. Yeah. Gotta worry about some of those things, Cubs. I think I'm gonna leave it off at that one. That one's a little bit. Oh, I'm drinking. That one didn't even make any sense to me. See who's on. I feel like raiding someone, but someone to raid. There are not many people I follow on right now. I may not raid anyone then. I can't see anyone I need to go harass. So anyway, Grimm's fairy tales. I really got to wonder about some of those things. Thank you for coming in tonight, Zane. Appreciate the visit. I usually do story times more on Friday nights, then I can at least act like I'm putting kids to bed. It's only 11:33, and it's a Tuesday. Maybe, yeah. Yes, it's a Tuesday. Anyway, glad you popped in. Hope you liked stories. I said it's translations from the original stories, so it's a little weird in the first place. Yeah, I'm gonna go and shut down for the night. So, just gonna say the bar is closed. Have a good night. And, man, don't drink and read Grimm stories. It's, yeah, just so much fun. Anyway, good night.